Here's some writing that I've written. Café Writing, Part 1. It's time to put ideas to the page. Giants roamed the mountainous ranges of my imagination, travelling from peak to peak as my mind goes from idea to idea. The concept of a magic mountain sticks in my mind. It is such a resonant symbol. It strikes me with the mysticism of a holy mountain like in the Himalayas. I think mountains are powerful symbols in our consciousnesses. They are so vast and seemingly incomprehensibly timeless. I wonder how these words sound in another person's mind. Words, when they are published, take on a life of their own. I think about how you must gain some kind of insight to how I think now, the now being in the past for you. But then again, for everything I express, there are at least 100 thoughts that go unexpressed. But then again, I'm not counting. I just let the thoughts wash over me and see what crystallizes into language, and what just passes seamlessly through me as either a memory or an unconscious notion. We often don't know what we are thinking until we work it out into the logic of language. Sometimes I have conversations with myself. I wouldn't call them dialogues, because it's not that I'm talking to another person in my head. It's more that I can hear my thoughts, and those thoughts build some kind of story or explore a narrative possibility. Or maybe I'm just trying to deconstruct an idea. I feel like writing is some kind of amalgamation of all these processes, except someone else might end up seeing the results of these ponderings. When I think about it, someone else is having a peek into my head, and they might see the cogwork of the machinery of intellect. Thoughts are weird, as they can be incredibly abstract, but we humans have devised clever constructions to express these, such as language. When we compare different ancient languages into the development of modern languages, we can see how people's ability to express certain ideas, and by extension have these ideas, has evolved over time. In some ways, ancient languages may be better at expressing some ideas. They may be more conducive to those thoughts. Writing is the passport to freedom of thought. When we write, we allow ourselves to go into uncharted mental domains. We enter the places, the people, and poltergeists of our subconsciousness, letting our language guide the flow of our thoughts. In some ways, we are mapping our minds, exploring the possibilities of thought. In some ways, what we read feeds into our minds, expanding the possible space for thoughts. But it's not until we try to write ourselves that we really explore the possible depths of these regions. The space of thought is not a two-dimensional cartographer's map. It is a multi-dimensional, non-Euclidean hyperspace, where some ideas are worlds away from each other, but only a word away with the right word. I am the architect of my own fictional world. I construct the framework of verbs and nouns of this mind palace that I will reside in. Reading is the action of seeing others' mental design plans, but they are important for creating the blueprint which I will use. But writing is the key for building my own mental palace that is distinctly my own. Here there will be a hallway, and there a ballroom. This will be a lounge, and this a Parisian salon. I am not limited to simply the designs that others have thought of. I can come up with my own nonsensical architecture. Maybe the stairway infinitely ascends like an airship print. Or maybe this hallway extends hundreds of kilometers into impossible spaces. My mind is the limit, and I shouldn't be bound by what others have done before me. Their designs will only serve as inspiration, not as a blueprint. How many times can I say the same thing with different words? Mostly I'm using on my creative process with different metaphors, but ultimately I'm saying the same thing. Writing is a process of thinking, and reading feeds into writing. I can say this many times to myself. I don't feel like I can explore concepts fully until I have a keyboard under my fingertips or a pen at my hand. I feel I need to tell myself these things when I write, because otherwise I won't learn and I won't continue this habit. Will anyone read these words right now? That doesn't matter. What matters is liberating my mind in a creative act. Are these stories or essays? I don't know. Maybe I don't have a clear idea of what defines different pieces of writing. Do stories have to have a plot? Do essays have to be purely informational? Again, someone with better knowledge of writing genres would know. But I don't think that it matters what kind of writing this is for the creative process. I just want to get my thoughts down to capture the ephemeral on paper. I want to create a thing. How important is it to make art? In my mind, it's important. But I've gone a long time from my relatively productive youth to now without creating many artifacts of worth. I don't want the peak of my creative output to be in my youth. That should be the beginning, not the apex. I also think I've answered my own question. This is an essay rather than a piece of creative writing. I don't think I've read many essays recently, so I can't easily pinpoint the genre. Perhaps later in this text it will morph into a short story. We'll see how this develops. I've repeated myself again and again, but maybe that's what editing is for. Cutting down unnecessarily overgrown ideas, pulling out redundant words like weeds, and expanding the parts which are underdeveloped. Sprinkle in some punctuation for good measure, and hopefully this piece is at least readable for whosoever will read these words. At least I made my word count today. Does that matter? I'm trying to tune into my thoughts. How can some people listen to and talk about nonsense all day? Can they not hear how little sense they're making? It's not like they're just making noise for the sake of it. Tuning in, but not dropping out, because it's worth sticking with. When you listen to music from the past, your gold hits sound dumb, as MF Doom says. There is plenty of bad nostalgia, but there are also classics. I got into an argument online about what defines a classic. There are a lot of gatekeeping about classical books. People disparaging good books because they don't meet the narrow definition of what is a classic. I don't want to get into it too much, but people aren't good at judging subjective quality. There seems to be no quality control on people's thoughts. They've lost the ability to think clearly. Not that people have necessarily gotten worse, nor better. It just seems to be the perennial problem of nonsense. Just as a note to myself, Bushfire Fairy Tales is still a good album. I think it resonates with me these days because I can more clearly understand what he's singing about. I have more life experiences. Maybe this piece of writing isn't that good. Maybe it's just rambling. I'm just trying to clear my thoughts. I'm trying not just to write the lyrics that I'm hearing. Maybe I should just read a book to clear my thoughts. Have a little break and get back into the flow. Footfalls thump onto the sand as waves hiss and gurgle as they wash up on the shore. The wind blows the sea spray up into the air with particles of sand. Seaweed putrefies on the high tide line. In the distance, gulls caw to themselves. Rips suck water from the shore back past the whitewash, and this all plays in my mind as I try to settle my thoughts. I experimented with Copilot on Word, seeing what words it generates. I felt while it created some interesting things, it was no substitute for my own words. Often it expands ideas I put down concisely into paragraphs and paragraphs of the same thing said over and over in different ways. I like the word it uses though, quietude. So I don't think it is completely devoid of value. I've been thinking of reading more poetry. I want to see words form into ideas and to let the eddies and currents of metaphors churn the seas of my mind. I've read some Yeats and some Keats, some T.S. Eliot and some Dante. I met a poet the other day. He took an interest in the conversation I was having with the barista and sat down to have a yarn. I was mesmerized by his words as I drifted in and out of the conversation. I set myself the goal of writing some short pieces on my holiday. I was struggling for time. I was struggling to find time for writing as the pace of modern life outsped my ability to keep up with my own thoughts. I was reading only because I was prioritizing books over social media, but I still wasn't finishing enough of the books that I started. Maybe I would get 100 pages in, then lose concentration and find something new to do. Maybe this was because I would always find something newer and more attention-grabbing in the bookstore or library. Or maybe it was because I only find the beginnings of books interesting. It's as if all the stories I read don't have endings. I'm sure they must, since don't all good stories have endings? I'm trying to think of the last piece of media I consumed that had an ending. When you start every paragraph with the same word and use the same rhetoric devices over and over again. When you start every paragraph with the same word and use the same rhetoric devices over and over again, we are constantly in an endless loop with ourselves. Or maybe it is a spiral where the terminus is the void. Someone said when you stare into the void stares back. I think this quote is referring to our tendency towards nihilism. When we complete nihilism, we become nihilist. Doesn't make any sense. What was I thinking when I wrote that? It's a vicious cycle. When I think about these spirals in my mind, my mind is brought back to Junji Ito's Uzumaki, which is a story of cosmic horror about these types of patterns. His work is simultaneously highly idiosyncratic and archetypical, if those are the right words. What if reality was fundamentally shaped into a spiral-like pattern? When I think about consciousness, I often find cosmic horror in contemplating the metaphysical possibilities of such patterns of conscious reality. This type of fiction really works on my mind, but for every horror possibility, there is a divine possibility, as explored in Dante's La Commedia, or the Divine Comedy as it's known in English. Many people only read Inferno, even though the work is meant to be read in its entirety. I guess that is a modern problem, where we get the beginnings of stories, but not an end. Or is this an age-old problem? What about stories with no beginning, nor no end, such as Finnegan's Wake? I have a habit of bringing up Finnegan's Wake, even though it's only tangential to the conversation. I think it is a fascinating book, but it is also a very alienating piece of literature. What do dreams resemble? Are they portals into our subconscious, or rather just babbling from our brain? It's weird that we sleep in the first place. You would think we would have evolved to have periods of rest that don't require us losing our waking consciousness for. I mean, having time to rest our bodies and grow and heal makes sense, but it's weird that we must conk out for that period too. Weirder still is all animals, as far as I'm aware, sleep too. It's not like sleep is optional either. I need to sleep at least 8 hours personally, or else I don't function well. I guess the regular amount keeps my circadian rhythm in check. I've noticed that I function best when I do everything at regular times, but especially sleep. It would have paid for past me to do this too. Part 2. Late night creeps on us all, and when I spend time looking at what I have written, some of it might be salvageable, but then again, the audience right now is me. Other people will perhaps read this at some point, but they don't matter at this moment. The point was to create something, not to hold yourself to some kind of unrealistic perfectionism from a phantasm. If people cared about what others thought all the time, they would be paralyzed and only create art that neatly fit with the canon of what already exists. Where would all the innovation be? Where would all the passion projects and personal diaries and sketchbooks be? I say, I don't write for others first and foremost. Write for yourself. Write for what you want to write. Write because you have that creative impulse that will not be truly satiated until you have made a thing that you can say is your own. When morning does finally arrive, my mind is obliterated. Sleep came slow, then all at once. And it's hard to crawl out of the oblivion of sleep into the land of the waking. Motivation takes a while to return to me. Then I pick up a pen or keyboard and write some more. Seeing the words written down from last night's escapades is the call to adventure that I need to start writing about my thoughts again. Conversations, memories and sensations fly around my head as I try to label my thoughts, and then the music comes back. My head begins to become beautiful again as music swimming back into the radio static. The poetry of myth returns from its 1,000-year slumber. Sea monsters rise from the depths to fight seafaring heroes who outwit forces of nature and make deals with gods, which they'll have to repay in this life or the next. The cosmic drama unfolds like an elaborate stage show being told by a masterful director as the legends unfold. All the narratives of myth and epics unfold. Beowulf slays Grendel again before going to fight the dragon, who in turn inspires the hobbit's Smaug, and this morphs into legend of modern fantasy, inspiring and creating new dragons and new myths to a generation about to write their own stories about such things in turn. Sundial cycle round and round, casting shadows at different points at different times of day of different seasons. The planets orbit the sun in some kind of cosmic harmony, beguiling and awing astronomers in the past and present. The stars, which seem static, slowly drift in their cosmic dance. All this happens while I am waking up, and will continue to happen regardless of my presence. Doubts begin to set in. A slow fog of anxiety rolls over and fills the valleys of my conscious. They linger for a while, then begin to dissipate as my mind moves on to other thoughts. The lighthouse is successfully warned of the dangerous rocks of the shores of my mind as the mixed metaphors sail round. Visibly begins Visibility begins to restore itself, and slowly I move on to the next topic of thought. There is always a chance of second guessing myself, but that drifts away into the past too, as all thoughts do, and they waft through air like a sea mist dispersing as daylight comes again. Part 3. People speak words, conveying ideas and defending their values even when they don't understand a bigger picture. All people see is what is in front of them, and they can't imagine the scope of the world, nor the value of peace. People feel threatened when power is taken away from them, not that they knew how to wield it when they had it. You know, it's like that one quote from a superhero comic that gets quoted all the time. I think you know the one. Even if you don't, that doesn't mean that you are immune from its influence, because comics are low art or anything. Powerful quotes can come from all kinds of literature, even literature that is problematic in many ways. Many powerful stories have been told in myriad mediums. It takes time for the great stories to emerge, but they will come, and not always from the demographic you expect. There have been great stories told with audiences of children, and ones for teenagers. This should come as no surprise when genres you don't explore have words that resonate with us. Just because there isn't much being made specifically for your tastes doesn't mean that nothing good is being made. Maybe you need to take a cue and broaden your horizons. Maybe what you like is toxic, and maybe there's a reason that it hasn't been marketed for a general audience. Maybe you should go back to the classics, reread the works of William Gibson, and learn, while things like that aren't necessarily being made now, what exists is good. And maybe if you support small businesses that sell the classics, then you'll find there will be more financial incentive for generating new works like that. I'm sorry for being overly specific, but I don't see how complaints about content being made for you is valid in this content age. You are the architect of your own hell. Support local bookstores, as they will begin to cater to you if you become a regular. Classic stories are being told all the time. Open your ears and eyes to them. Consume less mindless entertainment. Sure, there will always be comfort content. However, classics will not stop being classics just because you aren't looking at them. Things that are timeless should be enjoyed in the present. I'm not sure what philosophy this comes under, but we should be looking for self-improvement, whether it's correcting some of our behaviours or consuming the best ideas. Our ability to think is in a large part influenced by what we read and hear. We should aim to be a better version of ourselves, to overcome our past and present, to be the best future version of us. Our brains largely operate by language in terms of planning and rational decision making. We should be reading content that fosters sublime thinking. It doesn't mean we have to read the most complex of texts, or the most complex texts we can, but we should replace the doom-scrolling behaviours with some kind of betterment, both aesthetically and logically. It's funny sometimes that the supposed logical thinking is detrimental to us and the people around us, because we lack some kind of ability to see the emotional and environmental ramifications of our actions. Sometimes the simple rubric isn't correct at judging actions, simply because it is a rubric and not some kind of advanced hostelic calculation. Part 4. I read this as sort of a diary of thoughts. I was going to say it's a written visual diary, But then I realised that is tautological. I can simply say diary, because that's what it is. Writing down thoughts as you have them is the best way to have thoughts. You need to feed your imagination, or else you'll become outdated, like an old server running antiquated hardware. But you'll also need to practice putting your thoughts out there after you have developed them. That doesn't mean you need to broadcast your mind to the widest possible audience. Many people probably don't want to know what you're thinking about. And besides, your thoughts might not be that good in the first place. Think local. You can show a few friends your diary if it has nothing too deeply personal in it that you don't want others to see. But more importantly, you're preserving your current self's thinking for future you. You might be thinking that you could just remember your own thoughts, but it turns out that memory can be unreliable, especially when these thoughts are as complex as these. I think what Ulysses shows us is that the everyman's thoughts can be worth preserving in a novel. The kind of stuff that usually passes us uncontrived and unrecorded. Sure, there may be many mundane thoughts that people have, but there are also the deeply profound that when we put pen to paper just disappear into ether. Leopold Bloom is notorious for not being able to articulate himself clearly, even when on the inside he has a kaleidoscope of interesting thoughts and literary styles. Daedalus has the means to communicate himself, but finds that people just can't understand him or mock him when he has been serious. At every point, there is a failure of communication between what the characters think and others. That is why reading literature is so important. It gives us a blueprint for thinking about and expressing complex emotions, or even simple emotions that have time to be articulated fully. Literature brings the complexities of being human to the forefront. We all must deal with being human. Shouldn't we try to learn something about ourselves and our behaviours? Show us while exact experiences are unique, they aren't singular. Many people have encountered similar challenges, and those experiences can be crystallized into language with the right words and be transmitted across time in a medium as flimsy as paper. I find it surreal that ideas and fully realized stories can be transmitted on such a fragile medium as words on a page. How can these signs and signals be transmitted across time and space? How can they be reproduced, be lost, then found again? Even if the audience is just me, I find it amazing that I can encounter a version of a past me and have a conversation with him. Literature is amazing for all this. The exterior world can morph with the power of stories. The words that have been amplified by the reproduction of text can change people's minds and then in turn change the world outside of their minds simply by the actions that those minds take under the influence of the text. If the text is logical and truthful, it can reflect the natural world, and people can learn about this world without even needing to directly encounter those parts of the world themselves. In a very Orwellian sense, text can control truth, or at least what seems to be true to us. That's why whenever anyone writes or speaks, they are taking part in a metafictional game of truth-making. And this ties into why literature is important, so the words and stories feeding into the cycle represent the world, even fantastical stories that embody truth. Part 5. I feel I jump between different ideas at a rate that doesn't lend to cohesion of this work. But that's fine, because what is important is I'm having ideas and recording them. The act of writing is important here. I can make these ideas into a cohesive works later. There will be time to fix the logical inconsistencies, expand upon parts that trail off, and trim the parts that repeat themselves. Poetry unbinds the mind to the rigidity of thinking, from the rigidity of thinking, where things need to follow in some kind of logical structure, and allow for the emotional beauty of words to string the mind together. Sometimes sentences would be a rhyming meter, or maybe it's a refrain. Maybe it's a list of loosely connected words centering around an idea. Anyway, poetry and music can be good at unbinding the mind when it circles the drain of an idea for too long. When you feel that you are pulled back in by the suck of trying to articulate something specific, and you are not letting the ideas flow naturally. I feel this way when I write. Sometimes I feel my mind is pulled too strongly by the gravitational force of a thing, and I need to be unbound from its orbit. I shouldn't feel that I need to write about anything specific. I naturally will come back to explore topics again, either when I reread what I have written, or when my mind organically drifts back to a particular topic. If I get stuck on something, that's a good indication that I need to read something new, or maybe visit an old favorite. I'm thinking about what I'm going to read next, because I need to finish Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. I'm enjoying it, I swear I am, but now I am a third of the way through, and I'm finding it difficult to retain attention towards it. The allure of reading something new is strong in me, and even if I don't finish, or even if I don't finish or even get that far through something new, I guess this is a book's collector's impulse to always be looking for something new, for the new shiny thing. Maybe that is why I've been gravitating towards shorter books, stuff I can finish in 1 or 2 sittings, so I can complete the work before my brain decides that it needs to find something new to focus on. How many words am I aiming for in this document? Frankly, I don't know, and I'm just adding to it as I feel until I feel satisfied, or until my attention runs to something else. I feel it's more of a loose, free-form document than anything. Snowflakes keep falling onto an ancient university hall, where I am studying tomes containing knowledge of the past. The ambience is of quiet contemplation of the fellow students around me. They're here to learn as well as me. There'll be time to think, time later to talk, there'll be time later to talk to them about metaphysics or literature in the dining hall, but right now we are learning. Some people shuffle around to make it to their lectures before the clock resonates the quarter of the hour, heralding to them the upcoming seminar. As they leave, I look out the window and see snow motes gently falling, some of them sticking to the glass before melting against the heat of the indoors. I read for a bit longer, absorbing the atmosphere until I need to leave. I tidy my desk, put away the used reading materials, and checking out the books that I will continue to study in my room later tonight. I get distracted easily. I wish I had the attention of the imaginary me in the snow-covered university, who could devote himself to the life of the mind. I guess I'll have to be content with living in fantasy and flights of fancy pass through me. I'm not sure what my aesthetic is, what has been sold to me by influencers and social media. Maybe I'll revel in my geeky hobbies. Maybe I'll become dark academic. Whatever it is, I know that my social media feeds me with a feed of these lifestyle choices, saying, "Isn't this cool? Isn't this quirky or beautiful? Don't you want to be like these people?" I'm not sure what I want to be, but I will feed an aesthetic narrative regardless. Maybe when I post content, people will think about, "Wow, I want to be like this person," with whatever value set I present. Although my content could just go unnoticed by all except for content trawling bots, scraping data to use for some unknown ends. I don't know. Maybe all that awaits my content is the void. As I think about these techno-nihilism, my mind goes dark. I wish I could feel my mind fire a glow like Daedalus declaring his artistic vision to himself at the end of the portrait of the artist as a young man, before he finds that the only one he can have an intellectual conversation with is himself in diary entries at the end of the novel. Is that the fate for me, to be only read by myself? And if someone else does read these words, how will they respond, not knowing the real me, but a simulacra of me? Perhaps I am destined to tie knots, only to untie them and retie them again, in an endless cycle, till I can tie with my eyes closed and my wits gone. Maybe I'll gain some kind of mental acuity writing to myself. I might learn how to articulate myself in a manner that I can decipher later, then re-articulate the same thing to myself. But again, it feels pointless as I write these words, as I vacillate between hope and despair. That might be hyperbole, but there are times writing when it feels futile, and other times when it seems that I have so much to look forward to. Sometimes things look simple, of course. It's like this. Other times, things are too complicated, and the logic in my head only leads to contradictions. I'm not able to express myself. My mind is a tube of toothpaste that has been squeezed out until this frustrating, only a frustrating bit is left, and that barely comes out of the end of the tube when it is rolled up. All my ideas have been used up, and the only thing left is to discard the tube and get a fresh one. Only this is not true. When I feel like I've used up all my creative reserves, I can't get any more sensible words out, I feel that I've let my mind wander and put on the right ambience. Other several pages come out. The only limitation seems to be my focus and whether I've had a good meal, some sleep, and a glass of water. The seduction of distractions of my own thoughts are everywhere, but especially online. These companies have been harvesting my data for years, so they know exactly what kind of content I will engage with. Not just that, just people making content for these platforms have honed their craft. Not just that, the people making content for these platforms have honed their craft, so hone these craft for these audiences with feedback they have received from the same platforms, so that they have trained, in a sense, to produce content that would appeal to people like me. I'm not fazed by this process in a digital sense. It is an organic process where it's only natural that these processes will feed back into themselves. But it can be difficult to pursue my own creative endeavours when there is such a quantity of distractions available merely a click or two away. Sometimes this positive feedback loop will generate content that I'm genuinely want to engage with, and other times it will just be noise. A bitmap snow crashed onto a screen, feeding my mind with signs and signals that will make my brain think about something else. It's not just the creative direction that I want it to if I were to make something enduring. It's not just in the creative direction that I would want it to if I were to make something enduring. A stream of consciousness seems to be the style that most fits my writing, though what can you expect from someone who retaught themselves how to read as an adult from James Joyce? Thoughts jump around here and there, and I hope this I hope that this makes a coherent trail that others can follow. Each time a new idea bubbles up, it seems like I'm losing several more. I found when I was a child, I had words inside me that I couldn't spell, but then I knew them because I listened and I read. Did I read much when I was young? I think I did. Although this habit was never persisted. I read when I was taken to a library, and I would read at home because there wasn't much else to do. Although when I did find other hobbies, reading was left neglected, and slowly I unlearnt that skill, which I had so painstakingly acquired. I'm not sure who put the idea of reading into my head when I was an adult. I think I was in another town with nothing to do, and I wandered into a bookstore, and I decided to pick up a book from a series which was popular at the time. I had very little else to do, so I read it. There were parts I didn't understand, and I had difficulties. That book wasn't an easy one, but I got through it as my life disintegrated around me. That summer, in my mind, was the summer of being broke and reading A Song of Ice and Fire. It wasn't enough to get me hooked on reading, but it got me started. And when I eventually read Ulysses, I gained the confidence to read anything, although I knew very little about literature at the time. Although it wasn't until I picked up Discworld that I was locked in. James Joyce made familiar language unfamiliar, but he also made unfamiliar language become something which I grew accustomed to, and that was the challenge. So I could say to myself that I did it. I did a difficult thing that most people who read aspire to. Did I understand the text? No. But that wasn't the point. I just needed to start. I also felt that his books are meant to be half understood, that there is so much more in them than meaning. Language is a metavirus that changes the structure in the brain and reproduces itself in our behaviors and words. Joyce was someone who understood the mechanisms of language and used that in his writing consciously. The small pieces of syntax and morphemes that I understood shifted my thinking subtly in directions of intellectual curiosity. Sure, there were parts of my life falling apart right before my eyes, but intellectual curiosity led me to other classics where these ideas proliferated. There were different phases where things looked like they were coming together again, and other times where everything seemed like it was heading to oblivion. Sometimes it was manga and graphic novels that kept the intellectual thread going, and other times it was contemporary fiction. Sometimes it just felt right for the right time to be put in front of, sometimes it was just the right novel for the right time. Sometimes it was the right time for the right novel to be put in front of me. The flame for reading was kept kindled either way, and when things seemed to be reassembling into a more permanent and stable shape, the pursuit of intellectual curiosity was well alive in me. Okay, that's a reading from a piece of writing that I made, and you can tell it's a little holy. It needs some patching up. It needs parts trimmed away where I kind of ramble a little bit, but I thought there was good parts in there, and I'm probably just going to upload this just because I want to produce some content, and it's also a good practice just talking and reading, and it's easier to read words that I've written than to read someone else's words, which might not sound natural when I speak in my cadence. So anyway, cheers for that. That's the video. See you later.